Hi everybody, I hope everyone is doing well. I wanted to follow up our last tutorial on pivot tables and expand on that and introduce you to a feature within the pivot table called Slicer, which is a very powerful filtering tool. I'd also want to set up or attempt to set up a scenario um, to help give you an idea of when and why you would use a pivot table and a slicer feature as well. Um, Beyond just the functions and what to point and click on. So what I've done here with this spreadsheet is we have a makeshift company that sells various types of food products all over the globe. So if we take a look at row 1 here, very important, and I'll get back to this when we get into the pivot table. We've got our clients here, country, salesperson, order date, ship date, products, unit price, quantity, and size. These headings are very important, and as I always say, you should always try to have a good look at your data set before you start trying to analyze it so you know where everything sort of fits and what you're going to do with it. Now this particular table has got probably a little bit over 100 rows. What I'm going to show you in this tutorial, it doesn't matter if you've got 10 rows or 1,000 rows, it's still the same process. So here's the scenario. We work for this company, and management has asked us to look at our sales data from the previous month. They want to know what our sales were by product, but they also want to know sales by product in very specific countries and by very specific salespeople. So we're going to use all this data, and by using a pivot table and a slicer, we're going to very quickly extract all that information. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, I got to highlight all my data set. So I'm in cell A1, and I'll hold down my control key and hit A for my shortcut, capture all my data. And we will use the Insert tab, select Pivot Table, leave the default as new worksheet when you're importing a pivot table. You don't want it on top of your existing data. So we'll leave that there. We'll select OK. And now, just a moment ago, I was telling you about the headings that went across the top of our spreadsheet. Very important because as you see here in our, whoops, hang on a minute. You can't see because my head is in the way. Get out of the way. There we go. We can see here we've got clients, country, salesperson, order, ship date, all that sort of stuff. These were our headings, and these are the items that we can go through and we can just check off of what it is that we want to see. We don't have to pull everything in to our pivot table. So first thing we wanted to see was products. Okay, we'll check that. And you can see that products has automatically dropped down to this quadrant called rows. And we're going to utilize all 4 of these quadrants during this tutorial. And you can see that all the products that we carry are showing up now in column A. Next, we want our sales, of course, so we'll select sales. That has defaulted and gone down to our values quadrant. And what I want to do here, if we have a look at these numbers, I want to format these to be in currency. Very simple to do. We just select the drop-down arrow, go to value field settings. Don't touch this up here. Leave it on sum. That's for another tutorial. All we want to do here is click on the number format tab. Let's pick currency and OK and OK. There we go. And just like that, now all our numbers, our sales are showing up in a currency, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so the next thing that we were asked to look at, we've got our products, we've got our total sales by product, is our salespeople. So we go back up to our little shopping list here on our pivot table fields, and we'll check off salespeople. Now, I want to draw your attention to something quickly. You can see that Excel has automatically defaulted that selection down to the rows quadrant. And this really isn't an ideal look for my spreadsheet. I got to start scrolling down to look at things. So I want to move this around a little bit to make my spreadsheet a little bit more meaningful. And this is where having the benefit of a pivot table comes in so handy. So all we need to do to change the layout of our table, we can take the salesperson, hold down the left mouse button, and let's drag that up into the upper right quadrant, right here where it says columns. Okay, let go of the button, boom, just like that. Now we've captured everything in a more reasonable, functional looking spreadsheet. And it makes sense. We've got all our products here, and then across the columns, we've got our salespeople. We've got Andrew, Ann, Janet, Laura, Margaret, Michael, and our grand total. Perfect. Okay, so the last item that we were asked by management, let's just do a quick recap. We've got all our products. We've got the total sales by products, as well as, well, actually our total sales for products are right here. We've got our list of salespeople, and we've even got a breakdown of what they sold in total by product. Along with on the bottom here, we can see what their total sales were. Clearly, Margaret here was the star of the team. Those are fantastic sales. Okay, so the last item we want to pull in is the country. And this is where we're going to utilize our filter tab. Actually, you probably can't see. Let's move this out of the way here for a minute. Yeah, you can see we've got our grand totals down there. I'm just going to move myself out of the way up here for now. There's our grand totals down there. Okay, so we'll take our country selection, and we're going to click on it, and we're going to drag it down to this filter quadrant. And as soon as we do that, we're going to see that show up in cell A1. So let's grab that, drag it down to the filters quadrant. Okay, there we go. And here it is. Now, by default, it selects everything. So from this drop-down menu, step one, we have to check this box that says select multiple items. This allows us to go in and pick and choose what we want and exclude what we don't want. So we'll unselect the Alt tab, and we're just going to go through and pick up the countries that management wanted to have a look at. Australia, Brazil, Canada, France. From my list, they also went Italy and Mexico. So we're going a little bit further, and we're also going to take a look at Sweden, the UK, and the US. There we go. And now you can see the number, of course, changed. It was at 82. If you notice, now it's at 68,000. It reduced, which stands to reason because we're not looking at the entire countries that we sell to. We're only looking at selected ones. Okay, the other thing that I like to do, just to help keep track of things, is I like to rename my categories. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Personally, I just find it simple just to click on the category, and rather having it say row labels, I'll just say items, okay, or products. Here, this second filter we're gonna get to in just a second. I'm gonna change the name of that to salespeople. This becomes even more important if you're going to be sending these spreadsheets out to coworkers or your boss, and they want to go in and look at stuff. It makes sense to see, for example, well, there's salespeople, here's the items. It's just easier to look at. Also, you know, if you save and you put your work away and you look at your spreadsheet a week or a month later, and you try to figure out what all these things are, just saves you some time having to look in and find out what was contained in there. Okay, so now step one, we filtered on the countries. Secondly, we're going to filter in, we're going to use a secondary filter, and we just want to see select salespeople. So we can see here everybody is selected, so let's unselect them. And management just wants to see the results for Michael, Margaret, and Anne. Okay, so perhaps these three people, they work in a specific branch or geographical location somewhere, and the manager of that operation wanted to see just the results for their area. Could be all sorts of different reasons, but anyway, we just want to select those folks. And now you can see that we've filtered this down even a little bit further, and we refined it. So now we're just looking at the results for Anne, Margaret, and Michael in the countries that we selected. Okay, so you can see how quickly you can just go through and just pull out information, very precise and detailed information of whatever it is that you might be looking for. Okay, with that, let's jump into this slicer that I've been talking about. First of all, we are going to go back and select all our employees. Select OK. And now to access this slicer, we go up here to our pivot table, right here. Let me just move this out of the way for you. Oops, get my arrow over here. Too many screens open. So we want to be on pivot tables, and we want to select, oops, analyze. There we go. All right. So once we go into pivot tables on analyze, we will go over here to the filter quadrant, and we will select insert slicer. And here it is right here. And you can see we have yet another selection of what it is that we want to look at. Now this slicer It's just a super fast, kind of a really neat looking high-speed filter that you can use. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. So for this tutorial, for this example, we want to use our slicer to look at products. Okay, we'll select OK. There we go. There is our neat looking slicer. A couple of things we can also, before we get into it, we can change how the slicer looks. For example, on this one, because we've got a long list here, it defaults into a single column. We can make it a 2 slicer column just simply by clicking up, and now you can see we've got 2 columns. If you're given actual dimensions for the height and the size, you can just key those into these fields here. But you can also play around. You can adjust the size of the buttons. I can increase the size, decrease, the width of the buttons, okay, this way, that way, and the actual overall size of the slicer box itself. And I can control the width, okay, if I want to see everything there. All right. Lastly, we can also change the style, how we want it to look. So over here in Slicer Styles, we can select a drop-down menu, and I'm just going to select this Ice Blue Slicer Dark style for now. And there we go. Now we've got kind of a neat-looking style there to our slicer. Now I want to show you what this does and why it's such a powerful tool and so quick. Let's use an example. You're giving a presentation. You don't have a slicer, or you don't have any knowledge of how a slicer works. And you're at the meeting and people are calling out, they want you've got your spreadsheet open, your big projector's up, and people are calling out for different things that they want to look at. So you would use this filter button. So somebody wanted to take a look at just chai, for example. You'd have to deselect everything, select chai, select OK. All right, there it is. That was our total sales. Somebody called for a different product. So we go in, we have to unselect chai. Let's say somebody wants to see Boston Crab Mix. We check that, and we have to select OK. So you can see it's a bit cumbersome, and you're kind of fumbling around, and it's not something you want to be doing in a meeting for sure. So let's just pull everything back. I'll select all. You can hear that noise in the background. It's just my dishwasher running. Okay, so now for this example, we only have so many products, so you can actually see everything here. But if we had a large data set that had, 50 rows or 100 rows, and you had to keep going in on that filter, that would be a bit of a pain. So going over to our slicer, what this allows us to do, so for example, if we select chai, we can just hit on that. If we want to take a look at Boston Crab Meat, we can just select that. There it is. If we want to just look at chocolate, there's that. Not much in chocolate. And if I was a customer, I promise you their sales in chocolate would be much higher. Okay, but the point here is with the slicer, it's so powerful. I can go through and just select whatever item that I want, click, 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 and there it is. You can also have multiple slicers. You can combine these with charts. Very, very powerful, but that's for another tutorial. So when we want to get everything back, all we have to do, we just go to our slicer box here, and you see this little filter where we've got that little X there. Just click that, and that brings everything right back to where we have it. Okay, so quick recap. We use the pivot table to consolidate all this data that we originally had over here because we wanted to look at very specific information. We wanted to see all our products. We added a filter because we wanted specific countries. We added our salespeople because we wanted to see all their sales. We also have a filter on there, so we can look at one or more, as many salespeople as we want. And then we added the slicer in here. That was just sort of a high-speed, powerful filtering system with our pivot table. So I'm going to cut the tutorial off now. On the next one, we're going to expand on this a little bit further, and we're going to look at inserting calculated fields on our pivot tables. Huge time saver. And the example that we're going to look at is we've been asked to calculate commission pay for these salespeople. So they get paid 5% commission on their sales. And I'm going to show you within the pivot table how we can add a calculated field to do that. So until then, take care, and we will see you on the next tutorial.